hurts. Not so hard.
I don't get it.
My name is Jeff.
MattCMG, layer 69.
Hey everyone, it's me, MattCMG, and welcome back to the Weeaboo Hour, the unofficial name of the official series where I discuss the latest anime that I've seen as someone who at this point is pretty acquainted with the medium. I guess I can't even really call myself a non-anime fan at this point. Every few series that I watch, I make a video with my brief thoughts after a first viewing, and we get into some goofs and some gaffes. I'm not going to sugarcoat this one with a long intro or anything because this video is probably going to be long enough, so let's get weird, let's get wild, and let's get right into even more anime that I watched. Unironically. It's not even ironic anymore. I don't think it's ever been ironic, you fucking idiot. This mental breakdown is brought to you by my merch. Go buy it now, you fucking stupid cunt. In 2071 in the universe, the bounty hunters who are gathering in the spaceship Bebop will play freely without fear of risky things. They must create new dreams and films by breaking traditional styles. The work, which becomes a new genre itself, will be called Cowboy Bebop.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
Cowboy Bebop is another one of those shows, similar to Gurren Lagann, that I got into simply because I liked the name of it. Not only is the title iconic among anime fans, but it's just fun to say, whilst also having this aura of mystery around what it means. Aside from knowing Spike Spiegel, I knew nothing going into this show, and with all the hype surrounding it, my hopes were pretty high, and what I found was not exactly what I expected, but ended up being the type of show that I could definitely come back to again and again. Let's start with our characters. We've got Spike Spiegel, a suave space bounty hunter. His level-headed partner, Jet Black, captain of the Bebop, Faye Valentine, a directionless young woman with no recollection of her past, and a girl named Edward with like 4 last names, who's honestly just trying to vibe. Together with their genetically modified corgi named Ein, the 4 travel the solar system looking for bounties to score some sweet cash. The series follows their space escapades in a villain of the week type style as the gang all struggle to deal with finding their place in the universe. The series is mostly episodic with only a handful of episodes that have any kind of overarching plot, which is why this is such a hard show to describe to people, because if I were to describe to you what this overarching plot is, I would kind of spoil the show, or at least make you think that it's something that it isn't. First and foremost, Cowboy Bebop is an episodic adventure series, and to describe it as anything other than that kinda gives a bit of it away. The plot is only there as much as they need it to be. This is, for all intents and purposes, a character-driven series if I've ever seen one. So let's get into these characters a little bit deeper, right? Something that each of these characters have in common is that they all have something from their past that's holding them back and keeping them from truly moving on with their lives, and they're all in different stages of dealing with that, all coping in different ways. Jet is probably the one who's closest to having everything figured out, and that's not saying much because nobody has it figured out in this show. Jet is kind of the voice of reason of the group. He's always there to call out Spike or Faye when they do something dumb or risky, but his words of caution come from experience, as he too has made some bad decisions that got him to where he is now. Ed is arguably closer than Jet to figuring life out, but even she doesn't really get it because she's just a kid, so she offers a more innocent perspective of the world, which is a nice change of pace when everyone else is a massive cynic. Ed has her own problems that she has to deal with that I won't spoil for you, but due to her young age and naive outlook on life, she hasn't really let those things define her yet. Faye, like I mentioned earlier, has no recollection of her past, so her whole deal is that she's trying to find her place in a world where she doesn't feel that she belongs. She feels like something is missing in her life, so she goes about searching for that missing thing, even though it might not exist and she might not ever get closure. This brings us to Spike, arguably the most interesting character on the show. After leaving a life of crime, Spike joined Jet to become a bounty hunter, but he doesn't seem to take that job all that seriously. This is because he ultimately doesn't care about life anymore. He's perfectly content with wasting his time watching TV and doesn't give 2 shits about whether he lives or dies, putting himself into situations where he knows there's a high chance he could die, but he doesn't really care. But through all the sarcasm and nihilistic remarks, Spike is still a super likable character, where throughout the series he shows that he truly does have a heart of gold and grows a soft spot for his crewmates. In fact, the dynamic between the crew is one of the best parts of the show. Each of them joined the Bebop crew with the intention of it being a temporary arrangement, but they all end up growing really close to each other and caring for each other immensely, even if they want to pretend that they don't. Spike and Faye are probably the most interesting pair to me because they are essentially 2 sides of the same coin. They're both haunted by their pasts but deal with it in completely opposite ways, though I'll talk about that in a little bit later. The world and entire vibe of Cowboy Bebop is really cool to me. The show is set in the year 2071, where humanity has traveled to space and colonized the solar system, but it's not your typical space opera that you'd think of. It kind of has Star Wars vibes in the sense that they have all this futuristic technology, but it doesn't really feel futuristic. You know, it's gritty, it's grimy, the spaceships are falling apart at the seams, they use regular basic guns, everything looks and feels dirty. It's not what you'd expect of a space setting. This kind of thing works because not only does it offer a unique vibe for the show, but it makes their technology feel real and attainable, like we can actually have this shit in like 50 years. The setting isn't all there is to the vibe of this show, as Cowboy Bebop changes genres on a dime, taking inspiration from all over. One episode will be an action-packed battle with a crime syndicate, and the next will be the crew stuck on the ship dealing with a disease-spreading blob. The show takes inspiration from all kinds of different genres, like film noir, samurai and cowboy movies, crime dramas, blaxploitation films, sci-fi, and of course, jazz music, and a bunch of other stuff that I can't immediately remember, but it's all there, and it works so well because of the show's episodic structure. Another thing that really works about this show is, funnily enough, the dub. With the show's very Western aesthetic and influences, I think the dub really enhances it in that same way. Personally, I'm not really a dub or sub guy. I watch whatever version feels most appropriate, which is to say, it depends on what the show is. Something like One Punch Man is significantly better in Japanese than it is dubbed because a lot of the humor is lost in translation, while something like Dragon Ball works dubbed because it's not really meant to be taken that seriously, and depending on which dub you watch, you won't miss much. Now, let it be known that I don't live by this rule or anything. You know, I watched Ava dubbed, which is probably a cardinal sin in the Ava fandom. Apparently, Cowboy Bebop's dub is considered one of the few anime dubs out there that people collectively prefer over the original Japanese. Some people swear by it, and I can definitely see why. I've gone and watched videos that compared the sub versus the dub, and I definitely think the dub is way better. Steve Bloom's performance as Spike really helps give the character that jaded, sarcastic edge that he's known for, and I could say similar things for the rest of the cast. The dub just seems more fitting with the show's Western influences, which helps it kind of transcend the fact that it's an anime. Moving on, I mentioned the theme of the show earlier, and I'll be honest, I didn't really get it when I first watched it. I watched those credits roll in the last episode, and I kinda got it, but not really. I knew that there was something deeper there. It all had to mean something, but I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. So I did what I rarely do, and I went to YouTube to see what other people got out of it. Unless you're looking up ending explained after every fucking thing you watch, there's really no shame in that. Just by looking at the titles and not actually really watching these videos, since that would kind of go against the purpose of this series, the consensus seems to be that Cowboy Bebop is about forgetting the past, and upon further inspection, I can definitely see that. I had noticed on my own that every character was held back by their past, but I didn't quite get what the show was going for with it at first. It's then that I realized that every character deals with their past differently. Jet accepts his past and uses it as a lesson. Ed fully forgets her past and realizes that it doesn't matter. Faye has a bit of an identity crisis with her lack of a past, and Spike is the one who is constantly haunted by his past, driving him to do what he does. The struggles of these characters show us that you shouldn't forget the past, but you shouldn't be haunted by it either. Keep your past, your memories, your wins, your losses, all of it, keep it with you, but use it to learn and to become a better person. You can't erase the past, so the best you could do is learn from it. Keep it in the back of your mind, but never let it take over. Otherwise, you might do something stupid. I didn't really get Cowboy Bebop when I first saw it, but I think it's because it wasn't the right time for me just yet. You know, I'm still young, I haven't really lived enough and made enough mistakes to really resonate with some of the characters, and I watched it at a time where I didn't really need it. I feel like I would get a lot more out of it if I rewatched it later in life, so one day I probably will revisit the show with a different set of eyes. But overall, I enjoyed Cowboy Bebop, and if I had to describe it in one word, it'd be rare. It's just a rare experience altogether. You know, it's rare for a dub to be more accepted than the sub. It's rare to see a show that constantly changes genres every episode and make it work to its benefit. It's rare to have a show with both an episodic adventure and a deep overarching story at the same time. It's just a unique experience, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody, especially people who have never seen an anime before, as I think this is a perfect gateway anime with all of its Western influences. It's honestly just a whole ass vibe. Go watch it, please. I recommend.
What the dog doing?
Going from a show that I didn't really get at first to a show that I still don't really get, let's move on to the next anime of the day, Fullmetal. FLCL, pronounced as Fullmetal, was a short 6-episode OVA released in the year 2000 and animated by Studio Gainax. I say that a lot in this fucking series and I don't know why. Fullmetal would later get 2 continuations, with Fullmetal Progressive in 2016 and Fullmetal Alternative in 2018. People often say that Fullmetal, at least the first season, is one of the best anime ever made. It's kind of a cult classic for anime fans. And while there are aspects in which I totally see what all the hype is about, there are others where I didn't really quite get it. Similarly to what I said with Cowboy Bebop, I definitely enjoyed Fullmetal, but I think it just needs a little bit more time and maybe a rewatch or two before I can fully vibe with it. What are you looking at? No, I'm not gonna apologize for that pun. Fuck you. I intend my puns, motherfucker. Fullmetal brings us to a small town in rural Japan where we are told nothing amazing happens here everything is ordinary. This is the voice of Naota Nandaba, a 12-year-old boy who is dissatisfied with his life and is unsure as to what the world holds for him. He is deeply cynical for a 12-year-old, and this is his defining trait. Naota really looks up to his older brother, Tasuku, who is off in America playing baseball, leaving Naota with this empty feeling of uncertainty. His only real friend is his brother's ex-girlfriend, Mamimi, who slowly starts coming on to him. This is initially cut short, however, when Naota is hit with a bass guitar by a woman on a yellow Vespa. This woman is Haruhara Haruko, who claims to be a space alien but seems awfully familiar with Earth's customs. Haruko ends up living with Naota and his dysfunctional family, which ends up leading into some problems. But fear not, naysayers, as this is not a bad sitcom premise. The real premise of the show is that after meeting Haruko, Naota starts growing weird bumps on his head that, when in an emotional state, grow and pop to release robots that fight each other, which they then have to deal with the consequences of. This is all related to a subplot that isn't really talked about a whole lot in the show until like the very end, so I'm not gonna say anything on that because spoilers. One of the biggest things that kept me invested in the show is that it fucking oozes style. Every frame of the show has some kind of vibe. The art style will change on a dime to fit the scene. The movement and animation are unmatched. Even something as simple as the eye catches are dripping with that early 2000s counterculture aesthetic. I love the way the show looks, but I also like how it sounds. The music for Fooly Cooly was done by a Japanese alt-rock band called The Pillows, and I honestly could not think of a better type of music to accompany such an aesthetic. Absolute bangers like I Think I Can, Ride On Shooting Star, and Little Busters do a great job at encapsulating that frustrated yet hopeful feeling of youthful exuberance and preteen angst that the show is all about. The show doesn't really have a traditional OP like most anime do, and these songs tend to play as inserts during the climax or end of most episodes. I genuinely think that this show would not be as well liked as it is without that soundtrack. Quite frankly, iconic. But the music isn't all there is to the sound of the show, as the dub of the show kinda fucking slaps. I think that this is as close as a dub can get to the original Japanese. They use Japanese honorifics like how Mamimi calls Naota Takun, and they were able to get the rights to use brand names like Pepsi in place of the Japanese equivalent. This dub was written and interpreted in a way where it keeps the meaning of the original lines intact and keeps true to the culture in which the show takes place, whilst also changing only what they need to in order for Western audiences to relate to and understand it. The dub actors were cast partially due to the fact that they wanted the characters to sound the same in both versions. Kari Walgren was cast as Haruko specifically because she sounded like the original Japanese seiyuu.
That means voice actor in Japan. I'm kind of a fucking big brain individual now. Haha, weeaboo moment.
That was cringe. Fucking kill yourself. Though I wouldn't say the dub is better than the original like I would with Cowboy Bebop, Fooly Cooly's dub is just as good as the original. Another thing that I really like is that this show is funny as hell. There are so many comedic moments that are just straight up goofy. It's stupid funny, and that's not a bad thing. A lot of the comedy in the show is due to the animation that doesn't really care about staying on model, which embraces the squash and stretch type style. Alongside that, the show knows that it's weird, and it just goes for it, especially when it comes to sexual innuendos. The show is extremely sexual, and though this is mostly done for the sake of the theme that I'll talk about in a bit, it's also used for humor pretty frequently. If you like dirty jokes, then this might be the show for you. The humor is something that I think sets season 1 apart from progressive and alternative. The other two seasons are played pretty straight for the most part, and the comedy that is there isn't really of the same style as the originals. And speaking on the latter two seasons, I'm a bit mixed on them. The original 6 episodes, the first season if you will, have a very particular vibe, a very specific aesthetic, and is generally pretty unique all around. Progressive and alternative don't really have this same vibe, they feel a lot more generic. Even in something as simple as the art style and animation techniques don't feel the same as the original, and while this was likely done to appeal to a more general audience due to being made 16 years after the original, I think it kinda misses the point of what Fooly Cooly originally was. It's supposed to be weird, it's supposed to be different, but instead was watered down to blend in, when standing out was the charm of the original. Additionally, I found it really difficult to relate to the characters in progressive and alternative. It's not to say that they're bad characters or anything, I just couldn't relate to them because they're teenage girls. As you can clearly see, I am not a teenage girl. As a result, I couldn't really get invested into progressive or alternative as much as I did the original. I could see a bit of myself in Naota because I kinda lived that to a degree, but I couldn't relate to Hidomi or Kana because I haven't been in their shoes. However, this brings me to the themes of all 3 seasons of Fooly Cooly. I really like the first season and I like parts of the other 2 as well, but the theming is what keeps me from fully loving it. Now that's not to say that the themes are bad or poorly laid out or anything, because obviously a lot of people really vibe with it and resonate with what it has to say. I think it's just something that didn't click for me personally. For the original, the consensus that I've seen online is that it's about how growing up is a messy, confusing bundle of all kinds of different emotions. You don't really know what to think going into adolescence, and we see Naota struggle with this, whether it be through women making sexual advances on him, or him just wanting to hang out and do kid stuff instead of whatever teenagers do. This is a great premise, but I felt that, even in the final episode, episode, we never really get any closure on how this experience has shaped him beyond just admitting his feelings. Naoto feels as confused and aimless in the end as he did when we first met him, which I don't think is that great considering he did actually have clear development, but they just never really paid it off fully. Maybe this is intentional to show that nobody ever really gets over the confusion that comes from puberty, or maybe the meaning is that there is no meaning, as director Kazuya Tsuramaki states. Hell, the title itself, Fooly Cooly, literally doesn't mean anything. They titled it that just because it sounded cool. There is intentionally no meaning so that the viewer can take whatever they want from it, which even if I didn't get what it was trying to say, I can still at least respect that. The vagueness of the original series theme is kind of instrumental to why it works so well, and this is where I think progressive and alternative miss the mark. Progressive is about how damaging it can be to isolate yourself from the world and that relationships are what drives true happiness. Alternative is about how kids and teenagers view adulthood, trying to chase that perception of what they think adults are like, but even more egregiously, it literally spells out its secondary theme of how wanting things to stay the same can be damaging to the progress of others. I don't hate these seasons or anything, but I think by making their themes so obvious, they really miss the point of what the original was trying to do and say. The original was intentionally vague in this regard, which is why it resonates with such a wide range of people. These two seasons are a lot more specific and a lot more obvious about what they're trying to say, and though that's not a bad thing, it's just not what Fooly Cooly is. But at the end of the day, my personal issues with the theming of Fooly Cooly didn't really impact my enjoyment of the series in any major way. It is still a masterfully animated, compelling goofball of a series that rightfully stands the test of time. It's 100% one of the most fun anime I've ever seen, and is short enough that I'll probably rewatch it a few times in the future. I liked the show, I just wished that I liked it more. I'm actually kind of embarrassed to admit that I didn't like it more because this was one of the shows that influenced Avatar, which y'all know is my favorite show ever. I have zero problem recommending Fooly Cooly to anybody. It's a series that I think everybody should watch, and there's really no excuse not to because of how unbelievably short it is. And I can't say the same for the other two seasons, but I would recommend them for different reasons. Due to negative reception to progressive and alternative, it doesn't seem likely that we'll ever see Fooly Cooly return, but I would definitely like to see a more modern take on it, something that appeals to a newer generation, but with how timeless those original 6 episodes are, I don't think we really need that. I might not really get it the same way other people do, but it does seem like the world will always need Fooly Cooly. What? What? Were y'all expecting me to make a waifu joke in here or something? Well, how about fuck you? I'm not that predictable. Okay, fine, maybe I am, alright? Haruko can get it, fine. You happy now? Fuck you.
Women are from Mars and men are from Venus. I don't know about you, but I got a giant penis!
When it comes to iconic anime, you'd be remiss to not see Fullmetal Alchemist near the top of that list. Much like a lot of the anime that I talk about in this series, it's one of those shows where the name kind of transcends the show itself to the point where even if you haven't seen the show, you probably still know a little bit about it. My standards were pretty high for this one, and upon watching it, I can definitely see why people think it's one of the best anime of all time. So just for transparency's sake here, I should probably preface this section by saying that I opted to watch Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood over the original. This is because the original 2003 anime was being made as the original manga was still coming out, so after a certain point they just started making shit up because they were ahead of the source material. So no matter how good or bad that version is, it's not accurate to the manga, you know, it's not accurate to what the author intended. That is where Brotherhood comes in, a newer version of the show that's much closer to the manga, and most people seem to agree that it's the better version, so I went with that. Fullmetal Alchemist follows the story of Edward Elric and his younger brother Alphonse, two young boys who, at a young age, become talented alchemists. After losing their mother, the brothers try to bring her back to life by committing one of the biggest taboos in alchemy: human transmutation. But after their plan goes wrong, Edward loses his right arm and left leg while Alphonse loses his entire body, with only his soul remaining tethered to a suit of armor. Many years later, Ed becomes a state alchemist, being given the code name Fullmetal, and he uses this status to travel across the nation of Amestris with his brother to obtain a Philosopher's Stone, the only thing that can help get their original bodies back. However, in the way of this mission are the homunculi, artificial beings created by alchemy that reveal a grand conspiracy regarding the government and their true motives. If I got any deeper into this, I'd be getting into spoilers, and I don't want to do that. Throughout that synopsis, some of you might be thinking, what the fuck is alchemy?
What the hell is even that?
And I am very much glad you hypothetically asked that, because the alchemy is one of the most interesting parts of the show for me. In real life, alchemy was kind of a precursor to modern chemistry, kind of like a mix between religion and science. Outside of YouTube, I'm actually majoring in chemistry in college right now, so I found alchemy to be really cool in that respect. It really appeals to the sciencey part of my tiny fucking ape brain.
Yes, science!
In chemistry, there's the conservation of matter, which dictates that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, only rearranged and repurposed, and this is the basis for alchemy's law of equivalent exchange, which dictates that to obtain something, you must give up something of equal value. This is the fundamental rule of alchemy in the show, which I think makes it a pretty good basis for a magic system. It allows our characters to perform these insane feats of magic, but in a way that's limited, yet still feels real because it's based on real-world science. This is seen visually, where when alchemists transmute something from the ground, it leaves a little divot from where that matter used to be. That leads me into another cool thing regarding alchemy: transmutation. In ancient times, before we realized that religion and magic are a fucking scam, alchemists would use transmutation circles to try to turn various materials into other materials, with their main goal being gold and the Philosopher's Stone, which alchemists believed to grant immortality, among other things. This is used in the show, where most alchemists need a physical transmutation circle to be present in order to transmute. The aforementioned Philosopher's Stone is kind of the MacGuffin of this show, as it allows one to bypass the law of equivalent exchange, which is why it's so sought after by not only Ed and Al, but also the more nefarious characters, namely the homunculi. Speaking of characters, let's talk about those. This is one of those rare shows where I actually felt connected to almost every character, and that's not something that I usually do. The way that they did this was that they would introduce a character to give the viewer some kind of surface level impression of them, and then dedicate a fair amount of time to that character's backstory in order to fully humanize them after you've already met them. It's this kind of retroactive character writing that I really vibed with, and it actually changed my mind on a lot of characters that I hated at first. For example, and this is a slight spoiler but not really, I absolutely hated Hohenheim when we first meet him, but after learning his backstory, he felt a lot more human to me, and I ended up really liking him as a character. This is done with pretty much every major character in the show, whether it be through flashbacks or through dialogue. Something about these characters just felt so human to me, and that's saying something because some of them aren't actually human. Ed and Al have a shared backstory and a shared struggle, but they also have their own individual struggles that they need to overcome throughout the story, completely independent from one another. Ed is constantly haunted by the guilt of what he did to Al, and will often take responsibility for things that weren't necessarily his fault. He's got kind of a hero complex going on, but it comes from a place of guilt rather than righteousness. Alphonse, on the other hand, is a lot more zen than his brother, due in large part to the fact that he doesn't need to sleep without a body, so he's got a lot of time to think. If Ed is the hot-headed one, then Al is the voice of reason, constantly talking others out of doing anything rash, while also ironically doing some pretty rash things himself. There's a childlike innocence to him, and it serves as a good foil for Ed. Some other characters include the fire alchemist Colonel Roy Mustang, who kind of serves as this show's secondary protagonist. While Ed and Al take up much of the lore side of the story, Colonel Mustang gives us a glimpse to the military side of things. He's a suave yet cynical guy who at first seems to be doing things in his own self-interest, but is actually doing things for the greater good, usually with some grand plan. He offers a more strategic, tactical look at things, which comes into play throughout the series. But what good is a protagonist if you don't have a good antagonist to go alongside it? I can't actually talk about the big main antagonist of the series without spoiling some big stuff, but I will talk about some of the initial villains in the first 3 homunculi. A homunculus is an artificially made, tiny miniature person, but in Fullmetal Alchemist they are fully formed people, except they're not really people because they're kind of immortal. These ain't your average everyday homunculi, these are advanced homunculi.
But yeah.
The first 3 homunculi that we're introduced to are Lust, Envy, and Gluttony, named after the 7 deadly sins, each of which have unique personalities and abilities that reflect their namesake. Gluttony is, as you would expect, a glutton, Envy has the power to shapeshift, and Lust, oh boy, Lust. I wasn't into the whole Resident Evil vampire lady thing, I was never into that, but Lust can fucking step on me. She lives up to her name, I'll tell you that much. In all seriousness though, the homunculi are another great example of what I was talking about earlier, where the show will make you dislike characters at first, only to later humanize them and make you like them after the fact. Something I really appreciate about the show is the world building. It gave me major Avatar vibes. Fullmetal Alchemist takes place in the fictional country of Amestris, split into 5 different areas: north, south, east, west, and central, and it's revealed throughout the series that the country has a pretty complicated history filled with annexations and civil wars, dark stuff that we never see much of, but the effects are still felt by our characters. At the start of the show, Amestris is the only country that we know of, but about halfway through, the world expands and we're introduced to other countries surrounding Amestris, which I think really helps to make the world feel alive. I do wish we got to see some of these other areas, but I can see why we didn't. One of my only real problems with the show is the pacing, which is arguably one of the most subjective things in storytelling, but I wasn't a huge fan of it here. The show is only 64 episodes, but it felt like way more than that at times. For instance, I felt like we spent a little bit too much time in the snow area, which, not really a spoiler. There are occasionally these stretches of time where Ed and Al aren't in it at all, opting to instead focus on side characters, which isn't a bad thing, but it felt weird to me for the main characters to not be there for a few episodes in a row. Don't get me wrong, I liked the time that we spent with the other characters, but I was always thinking in the back of my mind, cool, But what's Ed and Al doing though? Another issue I had was the comedy in the show. It's not that the show isn't funny, because many of the jokes do land, even if they are pretty one-note and generic anime stuff. My problem is more so with when the jokes are placed. Like, we'll be in the middle of an important scene where the characters are discussing their motivations or forwarding the plot via lore dumps, but randomly mid-conversation the art style will switch to this simple chibi look for them to do some generic anime humor. Haha, so funny. Character gets mad at innocuous thing. Art style different. Comedy. I don't hate the humor, it just seems like it happens a little too frequently and is injected where it doesn't really belong. But aside from a few minor issues, I really enjoyed Fullmetal Alchemist. Like I said earlier, it kinda gave me Avatar vibes, but not just because of the world building. You know, maybe it's just the way they use alchemy looks kinda like earthbending, or is the goal-oriented method of storytelling, but I noticed a decent amount of parallels. But comparisons aside, I really did vibe with the show, and I can really see why people think it's one of the best anime ever made. It's got a great premise, a solid magic system, deep lore and world building, gripping characters, high stakes, and an ending that just kinda hits fucking different. I usually talk about the themes of each show in these kinds of videos, but the theme of this one is kinda spelled out for you at the end, and I don't really want to ruin that for you. All I will say is that the law of equivalent exchange doesn't just apply to alchemy. Overall, Fullmetal Alchemist kinda slaps, and I'll definitely revisit it in the future. Oh look, a dog and a cute little girl. What a wholesome pairing. I sure do hope that these two have a nice happy life filled with joy and— oh fuck! Oh my god! What the fuck? This is the one y'all have been waiting for. So if you watch my Twitch streams at twitch.tv/MattCMGYT, you'll know that it's kind of become a meme to spam the song Duvet by the artist Boa in my song request streams. I don't know why my chat collectively started doing this, but it's something that I just kinda have to deal with now. Thanks guys. Also, fuck you. This song, Duvet, alongside being an absolute fucking boner jam, is the opening theme for the anime Serial Experiments Lain, which my mods tell me is really fucking good. They've actually told me that it's better than Evangelion, and I have a really fucking hard time believing that. After a few months of my chat hyping it up, I've finally given it a shot, and what I found is, well, it's something. It's kind of poggers. Serial Experiments Lain is a 1998 anime where we follow the story of Lain Iwakura, a young girl who starts to become fascinated with the internet after she receives an email from a girl who had recently killed herself. Oh yeah, the very first episode shows a straight up suicide. Off to a pretty great start, guys. In this world, the internet isn't quite the internet that we know in real life. In this world, it's known as the Wired, and it's presented as though the users actually send their consciousnesses into the computer with special hardware that lets them do that. Lain upgrades her Epic Gamer PC setup and starts to become heavily involved in the goings-on of the Wired, but it's made clear that she has a special connection with it, and it starts to affect her personality, which bleeds into the real world when some internet people take an interest in Lain's online escapades. If I said any more, I would spoil the twist for you, and I don't want to do that. The best way I could think of to describe the show is with comparisons. I don't really like comparing things when I don't need to, but in this case I think it's better to have a reference of some kind. Lain is like a mix between Evangelion and The Matrix. The premise is very reminiscent of The Matrix, where there's this virtual world within the real world that affects each other with a similar late 90s aesthetic to the computers, where they don't actually look how computers have ever looked, unless you're running fucking Temple OS or some shit. As somebody who actually really misses this old internet aesthetic, you know, I hate this minimalist, modular, boring shit that we have now, I really liked that this show had this old internet vibe and did so in a way that felt specific to it. Technology aside, the show just has a very unique aesthetic in general. The art style is this weird mix between this old vintage anime aesthetic like you see in something like Sailor Moon, but with this more modern feel to it. Animation-wise, it's something special aside from a few standout scenes, but that can be forgiven as it's not a very action-heavy series. While Lain is a lot like The Matrix in looks and in premise, it's a lot more like Evangelion in everything else, which is to say that the writing and themes are extremely similar. The show deals with everything from loneliness and depression to religion and conspiracies, but I think most interestingly is that it deals with personality disorders and how the internet can exacerbate that. The more Lain uses the Wired, the more dissociated she becomes from reality, to the point where she starts to question what her reality even is, and her personality shifts accordingly. Lain in real life is very different from Lain online, and the things that happen online start affecting the things that happen IRL, and vice versa. This all leads into the main overarching theme of the show, which is in regards to how we as individuals communicate with the world. When the show first starts, Lain is extremely introverted, almost intentionally isolating herself, just kind of vibing in her room with her adorable fucking bear pajamas. Oh my god, it's so fucking cute.
You so fucking precious. when you smile.
Her entire life at the start of the show is a very solitary one, with her mother and sister not really seeming to care about or acknowledge her, while her father is too involved in his work to give her any attention. She has no real methods of communicating with her family, and due to her initial ineptitude with using the Wired, has no real connection with the outside world either. It isn't until after the suicide in the first episode that prompts her to not only learn how to use the Wired, but to connect with her new friends. It draws heavy parallels to today, where nowadays if you don't use the internet, you're basically out of the loop on everything and can't really communicate with people properly. We as people need to adapt to whatever the current methods of communication are if we are to truly connect with the world and the people in it. This show low-key predicted parasocial relationships like 20 years before parasocial relationships were a thing. Like I mentioned earlier, Lain's Wired persona is much different from her real-life persona, and without spoiling anything, a lot of people think that they know one because they know the other. People who know her from the Wired think she's the same way in real life, when the people who know her in real life would not recognize her in the Wired. This happens today all the time, albeit to a more obsessive and trivial degree, where people think that they know someone because of their internet persona, but fail to realize that that isn't necessarily how that person is in real life. And all of this comes together to form what the real main theme of the show is, which is that reality, or rather one's individual perception of it, isn't as cut and dry as we'd like to think that it is. There isn't really much that I could say about this without spoiling anything, so you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. Lain is described by many as an alternative anime, where it experiments with different methods of storytelling in order to not only differentiate itself from its contemporaries, but to go along with whatever message it's trying to spread. As a result, the show gets pretty fucking weird. There are a few scenes in here that'll make you say, sorry, what the fuck did I just watch? Which works to the show's benefit within context, but when taken out of context, these scenes are prime meme material. The whole show is intentionally surreal, so it makes sense why memes of it took off, creating this new resurgence of popularity of the show. I like how the show is getting this second wave of popularity over 20 years after its original run, which I think is a testament to how well the show has aged. Overall, I really liked Serial Experiments Lain. It's deep in its messaging, the aesthetic is just a whole vibe, and while I don't have much to say about the characters without spoiling the show, they're all really enjoyable and relatable in some capacity, with a special emphasis on Lain herself. This girl must be protected at all costs. I will die for her or kill others. And not in a sexual way, by the way. Nothing sexual about it. It's pure just fucking, I need to protect the shit out of this. Alongside being a generally pretty good show, I also greatly appreciate it for becoming so ingrained in the culture of my streams over at twitch.tv/MattCMGYT. Go drop me a follow. I know I say this a lot in this series, but this time I genuinely do mean it. I can't do Serial Experiments Lain justice by explaining it to you. Ultimately, this is a show that you really need to watch for yourself for anything I've just said to make even a little bit of sense. And there's really no excuse not to, because all 13 episodes are up on YouTube for free. The only thing that keeps me from fully recommending the YouTube uploads, though, is that they don't have the intro.
Play track 44.
A shawty's like a melody in my head. So, that has been even more anime that I've seen, bringing me to a total of like, I don't know, like 15 or something like that now? I don't know, I haven't been keeping track. Don't really give that much of a fuck anymore. That's how you know you've gone off the deep end, when you lose track of how many anime you've seen. I think the main takeaway of this installment of this series is that you won't always understand a piece of media on a first viewing. While it is entirely possible to get something on a first viewing, most media out there, whether it be shows, movies, games, music, anything, they all reward multiple viewings. Sometimes in order to truly appreciate something, you need to take another look at it. The first time around doesn't always cut it, which is the problem that I had with all the anime that I've discussed today. You know, I wasn't really in the right place in my life to truly appreciate Cowboy Bebop or Fully Cooley. I think that I would like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood way more if I watched it multiple times, and Lain required a bit more time to fully digest than I had thought. This isn't to say that any of these shows are bad or that I didn't like them. In fact, these shows are all great and I liked them all quite a bit. I just couldn't completely vibe with all of them. And that's totally fine, because now that means 1, I have a higher tolerance for complex narratives, and 2, that I now have an excuse to watch all of these great shows again at some point in the future. But that has been 4 more anime that I've watched unironically. I'll still take recommendations from you guys in the comments below, but for the next installment, I want to focus on one animation studio in particular, Studio Trigger. And I think future episodes of this series are going to be themed in a similar way. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see what the fuck I mean by that. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to this channel for more bullshit like this, and consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel. By the way, I haven't mentioned this in a video or anything, but if I reach $500 a month on Patreon, I will release a meme song cover album. You guys know that I cannot fucking sing for shit as I do at the end of all my videos, but if you want to see me do a full cover album of like the best meme songs, then be sure to pledge to my Patreon. At $500 a month, I'm doing that. But I've been MattCMG, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Play me out, baby! That's fucking terrible. I'm not using that. don't seem to understand. A shame you seemed an honest man, and all the fears you hold so dear will turn to whisper in your ear. And you know what they say might hurt you, and you know that it means so much, and you don't even feel a thing. I am falling, I am fading, I have lost it all, and you don't seem the lying kind. A shame that I can't read your mind, and all the things that I read there, candlelit smile that we both share. And you know I don't mean to hurt you, but you know that it means so much, and you don't even feel a thing. I am falling, I am fading, I am drowning, help me to breathe. I am hurting, I have lost it all, I am losing, help me to breathe. I'm just gonna take this opportunity to say, let's all love Lain. It just needs to happen. Fucking kill me, please. I'm not good at singing. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Let's get back into this bitch. Eventually. No, not doing that. It's not happening. I am falling, I am failing, I am drowning, help me to breathe. I am hurting, I have lost it all, I am losing, help me to breathe. I am losing, help me to breathe. That wasn't good, but whatever, fuck it. Let's all love Lain, baby. Woo! Let's go! Eat my ass!